So first big topic I want to focus on is Premier League mid-season grades. Which teams have impressed? Which teams have struggled? I released my grades for all 20 clubs. It's up at Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com. So let's dig into that. I want to look at which teams have excelled so far. I'm sure you guys will agree on everything, by the way. So feel free to come at me with any suggestions or change in grades. But I've gone for teams that I think have had a very good first half of the season. It's based on the first 19 games or so of the campaign. So I've given really high marks to West Ham, Brentford, Man City, Brighton, and Wolves. Nick, what do you think about that? Is that pretty spot on? I mean, I'm looking through the comments after the article went live, and some people do not agree with some of those grades, believe it or not. So just let me have it. What do you think?
No, I think relatively speaking, you're right. It's amazing how much something can swing over the course of just a couple of weeks, right? Because my first thought was, wow, Chelsea's not on that list. And then I realized, wow, this has not been a terrific couple of weeks for Chelsea. This is a tough period. It's also tough to judge because of the unbalanced nature of the table right now. That said, I find it difficult to argue against any of the points you make. Man City is having a season unlike any we've seen in maybe any league performance-wise in 10, 15 years. I mean, Bayern Munich's had one along the way, but this is 2009 Barca level, as you and I and Andy have mentioned a few times, aside from Messi being on the team. I will take grab one of your teams in Wolves. I'm so impressed that the defense is fantastic. We saw what they did against Manchester United recently. Neves and Moutinho in the middle are a phenomenal pair, and they make the back three even better. And it's a good back three with Connor Cody. They've replaced their goalkeeper. If they were getting anything from Raul Jimenez in terms of finishing, because we know he's so good at hold-up play, we'd be talking about them in the same breath as West Ham. So just a shout out to them. I think they've allowed 2 goals since the start of December, and one was to Liverpool and one was to Man City. That's not bad.
Not bad at all. And Andy, talking about not bad at all, Brentford and Brighton had really good starts to the season. Brentford in particular, I know it's a team close to your heart after going to plenty of games for the Bees in the past. What do you think of what they've been able to do? Because they are battling for a top 10 finish. Brighton are battling for maybe European qualification. So those are 2 teams that have totally exceeded expectations in the opening half of the season, right?
Yeah, the first half of the season, very good to both of those sides. We'll see if they have the depth. We'll see if they have the health. We'll see if they have the endurance, the longevity to stay there in the conversation for top half once we get to the second half of the season. I think Brighton probably has a little bit more of a claim to that, just given they're a little bit more established as a Premier League side. They've got a little bit more of that depth, and they don't have the injuries right now that Brentford have had, and that's cost them quite a few points in recent weeks. I think it would be a little bit torturous for Brentford fans to think, well, if David Raya and Christopher Ajer hadn't gone down on the same day at the end of October, the goalkeeper and prize signing of the summer at center back, where would this team be right now? Because it's not just hurt them defensively, it's hurt them going forward as well. So they could be in a little bit better spot. They are obviously, let me back up real quick. They're probably safe this season. They're halfway to the 40 points already. They're more than halfway. So they're sitting in a good position. I think one team that you mentioned, but we should probably talk about a little bit more though, Joe, Arsenal have been really impressive this season if you take out the first 3 games of the season. And they were two of the 3 were very, very tough. Manchester City and Chelsea, 2 title contenders, and then Brentford there on the opening day. That was a cauldron of atmosphere at the Brentford Community Stadium. So I think if you take those 3 games out and look at Arsenal's season from that point forward, and obviously those count, they've been incredibly impressive, but more than anything, consistent. And that's not something that we've associated with Arsenal in recent years. And so I think maybe the B+ that you gave them, probably about right. I might even go A- just because the difficulty of those first few games and how that kind of painted the picture of Arsenal in our minds for the season. It's taken a little bit of time, I think, for some people to forget about that and move on from it and actually see what they're putting on the field week in and week out now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of Tottenham fans are quick to point out on Twitter that why did Arsenal get a B+? And then I gave Tottenham obviously a slightly lower grade, but I just think that Tottenham having a C+, I think that's pretty fair. I think that Tottenham have underachieved slightly, but they're kind of gathering themselves back under Antonio Conte. They lost the manager. And I think Arsenal, the most important thing for me is the culture. They see that they've been able to come back. They've got a young team. They're building up resilience, I would say, throughout the squad. And there's a good blend of youth and experience there. You could see what Mikel Arteta is doing. And Tottenham are just a bit more of a work in progress because they changed the manager midway through the season or even earlier than that. So I'm happy with those grades. And yeah, I mean, I gave West Ham an A-. I think they've had a sensational season again. I mean, they're right up there in and around the top 4 picture. And some injuries to Antonio and Zuma and Ogbonna mid-season threatened to derail that. They lost a bit of form, but if you add them being still in the top 4 hunt midway through the season with a very relatively small squad and comfortably winning their group in the Europa League and making the last 16, I think this has been an incredible season for David Moyes' side once again, because we all expected them to regress, right? But they're such a fun team to watch. Had big wins at home against Liverpool and Chelsea so far. And the atmosphere around the club is just brilliant. And I don't know which players would really not want to join West Ham right now. If you said, come and play for David Moyes, come and play for this team that is really enjoying their football. So for me, they're really good. But we mentioned their Man City. I gave them an A-. I could have given them an A or an A+, but I just feel like there's still been a few defeats to Crystal Palace and others there that maybe just a slow start to the season, but probably not their own doing. You know, they had a lot of players coming back from busy summers with the Euros and took them a while to get bedded in. But yeah, the big winners, as I said, the likes of Brentford gave them an A, gave Brighton an A-, and Wolves and West Ham were right up there as well in that bracket. But Andy, jump in.
Yeah, let me chuck Crystal Palace into there, and I'll hold my hand up right now and say I had them going down this season just because it was going to be such a transitional period for the club, not because I didn't think there was quality there, or not because I didn't think that Patrick Vieira was a good manager. We saw him in MLS, we saw a bit of him in France as well, but the way he's come in, established a culture, I think that's an important word that you mentioned with regards to Arsenal, Joe. He has done that at Crystal Palace. He did it in the first 5 or so games, and they started picking up results pretty quickly. And now you can see what that side can become with a little bit more time, under his ideas and working on them in training every day, but also with some smart recruitment and players coming in maybe in January, maybe it waits until the summer. But I think if you look at all of the clubs outside of the traditional Big Six, they're in the third, top 2 or 3, I think, positions for the future, just in terms of the foundation that they have laid this season and going forward. So a lot of really, really positive vibes, I think, there in South London. All the London clubs, for the most part, have, performed pretty well so far this season.
They have, and I gave Palace a B, which I think is pretty decent. I think I'm happy with that grade. Could even be slightly higher, but it's quite difficult because the league is so tight. Outside the top 6, there's a band of teams there where if you win a game, you're in the top 10, or if you lose the game, you are 14th or 15th and just looking over your shoulder towards the relegation zone. But I think there's a clear group there at the bottom of the table that will probably be there for the rest of the season now. The bottom 4 or 5 are kind of getting cut adrift at the moment. So let's have a look at the teams that struggled so far this season. I've given the worst grades to Newcastle United, Manchester United, Norwich City, Burnley and Everton. Nick, can you make any argument for changing any of those teams? I know Newcastle's a club close to your heart, and I regret to say that my grade for Newcastle is an F. And I don't know if you think that's too harsh, given the situation that with the takeover, but it's about right, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm going to throw a net over 3 teams of differing grades and differing qualities, and that's Tottenham, Manchester United, and Newcastle United. And the reason is this. I look at Tottenham and I think, well, what if they just took Antonio Conte in the summer and gave him what they wanted? They were willing to do it. Maybe that means Harry Kane is gone, but because it's Conte, maybe Lukaku or Lautaro Martinez, maybe they end up following Conte to Spurs. How are they looking? Because right now they're positioned to be a top 4 team. They really are. Imagine what they could be competing for had this move been done earlier. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, same thing. Again, I don't want to just beat on the guy, but I think it was fairly clear to most people that it wasn't going to work for him, especially wasn't once they grabbed Ronaldo. What if that move was made in the summer? Steve Bruce, look, I find him to be a likable person. He's not the guy they needed to stay up. They needed a better system. They haven't been able to defend. So I look at some of these decisions being made right now. We look at Norwich as well, and perhaps we're not thinking of them the way that we would like to, because the Dean Smith bump was short-lived. But maybe if they had cut ties with Daniel Farke earlier, that could have worked as well, or stuck with him. So I think a lot of the failings we're seeing, those decisions were made in the summer. not those decisions, but the judgment was coming in the summer. So Newcastle, Manchester United, and Tottenham just need to look at the people who run their clubs. And that's probably the reason they're at where they're at.
That's very true. I gave Man United a D-. I did the same for Everton as well. Two teams there that really are underachieving with the squads they have. You mentioned Burnley, D. That's what I gave them. It's difficult because that's probably even slightly harsh considering that they don't have much investment in the club. Maxwell Cornet, their big summer signings, done really well. And they're still within touching distance at the bottom, right? Even Norwich are only 3 points from safety, 4 given their goal difference. But it's really tough to be too hard on these teams when, like you said, Norwich and Burnley, we probably expected them to be in the relegation battle at the start of the season. They're in there. Watford are kind of in that same mold as well, but I think they've done slightly better than we thought. But it's really tough. I think the big underachievers for me are Everton and Manchester United with the squads that they have, the tactics. Yes, Everton have been unlucky with injuries to Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison. I think if you had them in for the first half of the season, they'd probably be slightly further up the table, but I don't think it would have been too inspiring from Rafael Benitez's side. And you can see things there are just, they need a huge overhaul. It's been needed for a long time. The squad's so bloated, and we say it so many times. But Andy, any thoughts on the strugglers?
Yeah, on Everton, expectations, I think, is the right word to use there because we did have expectations, and you say it's time for an overhaul. I thought they did the overhaul. I thought that's what the hundreds of millions spent over the last couple of years was. I thought that was Everton building something for the future and building a strong squad. And suddenly they're down there near the bottom of the table once again. To Nick's point, when you've got the wrong manager in charge of the wrong squad at the wrong time, Rafa Benitez clearly not the right fit for the players that they have there. The ideas that Everton, the way that Everton have traditionally played, and the Everton fans have clearly not taken to him. It's just a really bad situation. I would put them at a lower grade, maybe an F-, lower than Newcastle, just for the fact that there were legitimate expectations from this Everton team this season, and I accept that the injuries have played a big part. But when you've spent that kind of money, you should have a bit of quality behind the starters, and they just have had no answers whatsoever, and it seems like nobody is really fighting anymore at that club. It looks a lot like Spurs before Nuno went, and then Conte came in, and suddenly everybody that was a 5 out of 10 every single week raised their game immediately, and they're a 7 out of 10. So I think a managerial change there, makes a big difference. But again, to Nick's point, it goes beyond that. It's the recruitment. It's how the money has been spent. It's the people making the decisions that have let Everton down this year.
You talked about money being spent there. Obviously, that's a saving grace for some of these teams. At Manchester United, did they go out and buy a holding midfielder, some new defenders in January to kick themselves on? We expected them to be title contenders this season. They are struggling to be in the top 4 at the moment. So, and they've brought in a lot of good players: Ronaldo, Varane, Sancho. Obviously, we will have a discussion on another day about Ronaldo and bringing him in. Was that the right decision? I know some of us thought that was an incorrect call in the summer to disrupt the dressing room, and that seems to have happened on some levels. And it's very strange what's going on at Manchester United right now. It's going to be a long, long process once again for them to get back among the elite. I don't think they're too far away, but definitely needs some fine tweaking from Ralph Rangnick, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well, to sort out, again, the recruitment, the mentality, the culture at the club from top to bottom. And Newcastle United, I think, Nick, the last point on them, they have the January transfer window. They have wealthy owners now, so they can get themselves out of trouble. And that whole takeover situation was obviously rumbling on in the background. Steve Bruce stayed on without a lot of investment in the summer. But now that Eddie Howe's in, they have a clear plan and playing style. They could save themselves some relegation. As I said, it's pretty tight at the bottom, and it's 3 from that bottom 4. I think we can all probably agree that are going to go down this season. So, some optimism for the new year for Newcastle United. All right, gents, final thoughts on this. Any grades you change? Anything you think I've got horrendously wrong here? Come at me with that, Nick. I'll start with you. Any teams you think that I did a disservice to in my mid-season grades?
Well, remind me, what did you have for Leicester City?
For Leicester City, right, this was tough. I had a C because I think they're basically exactly where they should be. And injuries have hit them hard. So that's what I had for them. What do you think?
Yeah, well, so the reason I say that is I think you're right to do it because of your justification for it. There are reasons to say if Brendan Rodgers is as good at his job as everyone seems to say he is, that they should have been able to get through it, because we just keep backing, well, Fofana was hurt, well, Fofana was hurt, well, Fofana was hurt. Right, but you know what? Liverpool lost Van Dijk for a year, and it wasn't the absolute end of the world. If you're a good enough manager, figure it out. So I think you're right to give them a C for that reason, but I look at both Everton and Leicester, and if Shine hasn't come off of Rafa, even after the great work he did for Newcastle, and if Shine hasn't come off of Brendan Rodgers, then they may be unassailable at this point, because I think they've both disappointed this season.
Andy, same question for you. Who was I harsh on, or maybe who did I give too high a grade to?
I think you got most of them right. I'll point out Aston Villa really quickly. You gave him a C. I think maybe it could be a little bit lower, and same story with Spurs. When you have to fire a manager 10 games into a season, I don't know that halfway through the season you can be anything better than like a D or an F, because it was such a bad situation to start the season. Obviously, Conte and Gerrard coming in have righted some things and got them going in the right direction. And the degree of difficulty for Villa was going to be high this season, moving on from Grealish, spending all that money on 3 players, bringing them in, fitting them into the system, finding what the system is going to be without Jack Grealish, because he kind of was the system at Aston Villa. So I think you got most of the grades pretty right here. The only exception that I would have had would have been the Arsenal one a little bit earlier, and I would have put them a little bit higher.
Nice. All right. That's not too bad then, all things considered. And remember, head over to Pro Soccer Talk on NBCsports.com to check out my full mid-season grades for all 20 clubs, analysis on every single team and how they fared so far. And that sets things up very nicely for the second half of the season, gents, which I know will keep us very busy indeed.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe, studio host for NBC's coverage of the Premier League. Don't forget to hit subscribe to watch highlights all season long, and be sure to tune in for Premier League mornings every weekend at 7 a.m. Eastern. And for even more content, head over to Peacock, where we've got live games, original series, and a dedicated round-the-clock Premier League channel featuring studio shows, classic matches, and much more.